Welcome to another episode of the Your Longevity Blueprint podcast. Today, my guest is Sinclair Kennally. She's a former chronic illness patient turned health activist. As an award-winning expert on chronic digestive illnesses, CEO of detoxrejuvenation.com, and host of the Your Health Reset podcast, she's on a mission to help people discover the real reasons behind their health issues and take their power back. Welcome to the show, Sinclair.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. It's a joy to be here.
We're going to get to some good stuff today, but as many of the listeners know, chapter 5 of my book, Your Longevity Blueprint, compares the laundry room in our homes to the detox organs in our body, right? We have a constant influx of dirty clothes in our home, especially with a toddler, that need to be washed, dried, folded, and put away. And that never stops. That's an ongoing process. It's not like we do the laundry once in our life and it's done. Is constant. The same is true with our bodies. And I know that's something that you heavily focus on. I mean, if we're not detoxing, we die. I mean, literally, that could be the title of this episode, Detox or Die, right? So there are things that we can do to limit our exposure to toxins, and there are things we can do to help our detox organs work more effectively. So that's what I want to focus this episode on today, and you're an expert in this area. So let's start with your story, Sinclair. So how did you become the CEO of Detox Rejuvenation?
The hard way.
That's the best way. It makes for the best story. So let's hear it.
Yeah. Well, both my partner in all things, Michael Spandell, and I actually started in mental health. And we were convinced that most health issues were actually highly psychosomatic. And, we loved helping people with the, mental and emotional aspects of healing. And then we both got too sick to continue our practices. And we became mystery chronic illness patients. We had very different symptoms. And it didn't matter which specialist we went to, they all had different ideas. Each one was weirder and dumber than the last. I got put on all sorts of weird medications and misdiagnosed over and over again, or just told everybody loves to hear this, right? Your labs look normal, you're fine, that's all in your head. So it was a really tough few years, but Michael was the one who actually figured it out. He was at a European toxicology conference and he called me and said, "Oh my God, I know what's wrong with both of us."
Wow.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit of, so you both were toxic, it sounds like.
Yeah.
So can you share for the listeners so that they know, like you mentioned your symptoms were different, so you may not have thought your root cause was similar.
Right.
What were some of your symptoms as compared to his symptoms that both had this
great question. So I had fibromyalgia and it went undiagnosed. And I also had Lyme and mold poisoning and heavy metal poisoning. And what that amounted to for me on any given day was extreme depression and social phobia and anxiety and the inability to really function with any stimulus whatsoever. Like I write on my website stories, things like standing in a coffee shop line and absolutely having a meltdown because it was taking too long to get to the front, but it was really just that I couldn't stand for more than a few minutes at a time.
Wow.
So by the end of it, for me, I couldn't read an email. I couldn't write a sentence. I couldn't stand up for more than a few minutes at a time. I couldn't even walk to the back of my own office building to check on my own employees. It was absolutely terrifying. Yeah. And I had insomnia, whereas Michael could never really wake up, honestly. And he had food sensitivities that seemed to change overnight. He'd get on a roll, he'd finally, he'd say, "Okay, I finally found it," and he'd have a very, very strict diet and it would work for about 2.5 weeks. And then everything would shift. He had serious mast cell activation issues, right? And extremely histamine sensitive, unlivable skin sensitivities. He had a rash that really didn't look bad to the outside, but it was just constant itching and, the sensations for him were just unlivable. And he would take like 10 hours a day to wake up. It was by like 7 p.m. he'd finally be good to go.
When I hear patients like Michael, I think EMFs could be causing problems, and I think mold. I mean, in many of those cases, and I don't know if that was true for him or not, or if you don't even have to share what his problems were if you don't want, but maybe we'll dive into those.
Yeah, you're spot on. EMFs were a huge issue for us in our house. They were absolutely making us sick. We were sleeping in 7 volts, which anything over 1 volt is considered catastrophic by building biologists.
So how did you figure that out? Basically, he went to a conference and he basically thought, okay, I need to start exploring some of these triggers, or?
Yeah, so it's an exciting time in the US that these ideas are finally getting out there, but many years ago they were not.
No.
Europe was way ahead of us. So he finally started connecting the dots himself about heavy metals and my symptoms and mold exposure. He said, we need to look into this. And he started digging in. And I had mold in my office at work, and I had mold in my car. We didn't have it in the house. Well, we did have it in the
Yeah.
basement, but it wasn't like a house-wide issue.
How'd you
So
know you had it in your car?
he could smell it and I couldn't.
Wow.
Mhm.
Wow.
And
Did you ever
interest-
have like rain or like water damage in the car that?
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
just a tiny seal leak in the
Mm.
rear passenger door. You never ever would have noticed it, almost invisible to the naked eye. But I
Wow.
could feel that it was damp every once in a while after a rainstorm. And living in Oregon, that's sort of
Yeah.
part
Yeah.
of life there.
Interesting. Well, I want to dive into all of these, even mold, more specifically, but maybe I should back up and first have you kind of define for the listeners what a toxin is. Like what's the deal with toxins? What are they?
Such a great question. Okay, so we do make our own metabolic waste that is toxic to us in our bodies that need to be excreted. But that's not what we're talking about when we talk about toxins for the most part today. We are talking about um, substances that our bodies were never designed to interact with in the first place, even if they are from the earth itself, like aluminum is a major toxin. We are living in the aluminum age. We have been for decades.
Mm.
Aluminum is used for everything. It's in our food. It's in our cookware. It's in our personal care products. Our food is stored in it. So that's an example of a toxin that is really abundant in the Earth's crust, but we never evolved with it because we weren't mining the Earth's crust until very recently, in any kind of way. But for the most part, when people are talking about toxins, they're talking about industrial chemicals, which there are over 100,000 of them, and very few of those have been tested for safety. We think in the US that if it's on the shelves, it must be safe. Somebody is looking out for me. And honestly, that's not really the case. The burden is on the consumer in the US to prove that something is hurting our health. The burden is not on the companies to prove that something is safe for the public.
So when you say industrial chemical, because I want to break this down for the listeners, because I think some of my guests are so smart that they don't mean to, but they almost talk over the audience. When I hear industrial chemical, I think of like a factory. I think of and we have many factories in Iowa, like driving across the interstate, like don't roll your windows down or you're going to smell who knows what, pollution. But when you say industrial chemicals, are you talking about like cleaning chemicals that are on the shelf at Target? Like, is that what you mean by that?
That's a great question. I'm talking about synthetic substances that are, yes, in our cleaning products. They're also in our building materials. They're in our personal care products, and they're in our food and our food packaging. So
they're everywhere.
Yeah, they are everywhere. They're in our air, they're in our water. Guys, our water is really toxic.
Yeah.
Our municipal water facilities were not designed to filter this stuff out. You cannot assume that this is being handled for you. What I tell people is it's not your fault that you're getting exposed to all these things, but it is your job to fix it.
That's good.
And, so industrial toxins, just to give you a figure from the EPA, the EPA itself admits that as of 2018, we were importing 250 pounds of chemicals per person per day into the US. Per person per day. And that does not count herbicides, pesticides, fuel, or pharmaceuticals.
Like it makes me think maybe I'm just naive.
Where is all that going?
Yeah, where are they going? Yeah.
And it doesn't
into our water, into our air, into all the things that into our bodies.
Yeah.
Yikes.
Interesting. Yeah.
So toxins can be, the list goes on and on, but before maybe we continue on that list, I know you also specialize in getting to the root cause of digestive issues, which you strongly feel are toxins, right? So there are 7 of these major root causes that I want to break down. I think we just hit on number 1. So I wanted to kind of mesh those questions together. So am I right in saying one of those root causes is industrial chemicals?
Absolutely, because industrial chemicals like the major umbrella family of toxins are very, very good at disrupting our natural self-balancing mechanisms in our body. Another way to say that is they stop our body's ability to heal ourselves. And so, and it's not just about like a toxin comes in and then it goes out, passes through and it's a little bit irritating on the way. No, toxins come in and sometimes, up to 80% of that volume gets stored. If your body can't excrete it right away, it will try to tuck it away. And it's got a lot of short-term strategies that work really well for that. But unfortunately, they add up over time to some very real chronic symptoms and illnesses, right? And this is what I want people to understand. If you are struggling at home, if you're one of the 2 out of 3 Americans that has had digestive issues within the last 7 days, this could be a component for you, and it's worth looking into. That's an insane statistic, isn't it? 2 out of 3 Americans have had chronic digestive symptoms within the last 7 days.
It's just wrong. It's not right. But I believe it. I believe it.
And we think, oh, it's just me, that's just how my gut works. Or, I'm on the short bus, my body's just funky, or everybody in my family has this. Well, your whole family may have been exposed to something, or you may be expressing something genetically, like this is how your genes respond to this toxin.
Exactly. Exactly. So let's move on down that list of those kind of 7 root causes, or those kind of maybe 7 toxins. So what would be next after industrial chemicals?
Well, it's important to understand that herbicides and pesticides are on all of your food, and they're also in the water itself. So, and that includes organic food. And I'm not discouraging you from buying organic. Nothing could be further from the truth. I really want you to buy organic because it's one of the only ways we can show our buying power and dilute this and change the conversation, right? But it would be naive to think that you're not getting exposed. And like, for example, all grains that are organic, it's legal to spray them with glyphosate, which is, that.
What?
Yes, as part of the harvesting process as a desiccant, because it speeds up harvesting and makes it more economical. But because it's not considered a growth agent at that time, it's still considered legal to call it organic. And even if you love your brands of organic grains, like Bob's Red Mill or, whatever your favorite is, they don't have enough insight into the supply chain. They can't actually guarantee that they're buying from suppliers that are avoiding that practice.
Because that's my next question is, how do you find suppliers who aren't? How do you know who's not using glyphosate? If organic's not good enough. Yeah.
Right. You have to start asking really intelligent questions. And there's some great small companies out there like Blue Mountain, like Wildly Organic, like Terrasol. These are, each food has its weird quirks about what you can do to it to destroy it nutritionally and still call it organic. But this is why it's worth digging into this and starting to follow those small brands that are making the tough choices. And frankly, giving yourself the room to do that because you're so worth it. And so is your family.
Yeah.
You either pay for it now or you pay for it later, right? But back to your question, in 7 root causes. So there's industrial toxins, herbicides and pesticides, heavy metals. Like, for example, most people don't realize this, but if you trace back your timeline and you're somebody with digestive issues and you had many amalgam fillings, look at when they were put in and when your digestive issues started, because half the weight of those amalgam fillings by volume is mercury. And more than half of that mercury will evaporate within the first 7 years of them being installed in your mouth. It is not stable. Mercury evaporates at room temperatures and higher. So it will pass right through your membranes. It will go down into your digestive tract. It will go into your brain. It will go into your thyroid, all the places you do not want mercury. And there are many, many digestive conditions associated with mercury exposure.
So listeners, think of what Sinclair just said. So she said at room temperature or above. So if you're drinking a hot beverage and you have a bunch of metal in your mouth, as you're drinking that, or if you're consuming warm foods, with each chew, mercury vapors are being released. And where are they going? I mean, they're literally getting stored elsewhere in your body. So very scary. So on the heavy metal topic, amalgam fillings are one huge source of exposure. What other sources?
Yeah, fish gets a bad rap because, we're aware that especially the higher up the fish is in the food chain, the more likely it is to be high in mercury. But really, fillings are
biggest.
the greater source of exposure. And now that we're multiple generations into the mercury amalgam experiment, it's been over 100 years, you've got your mama's mercury in you, you've got your grandma's mercury in you, depending on when their fillings were put in. So there's also a generational burden to consider, and it does matter your birth order. The oldest will get a higher, yes,
That's me.
exposure from mom. Me too. That's why
Interesting. For the
Also,
listeners, I have
the
2 episodes on holistic biologic dentistry. So if this piques your interest, please listen to those, because there is a way to safely remove them. I have had mine safely removed. Don't just call your dentist up after hearing this episode and say, I want them all removed tomorrow, because that's not the best way to go about this. So please listen to those episodes where we can dive deeper, and maybe you can echo or comment on that.
That's such a great point, Stephanie. I'm really glad that you brought that up, because we like to see you prepare for it and support your gut and get the body ready to remove the fillings. And we want you to work with a biological dentist who, I want you to grill them. And so listen to Stephanie's episodes about that, because not all biologic dentists are created equal. You can go to iaomt.org and start there, which is great.
Mhm.
But you really want to understand their process and make sure that they are protecting you just as much as they are protecting themselves. It's not enough for them to put on a hazmat suit when you are removing these things. It can be quite the toxic exposure unless you are getting protected with binders before, during, and after, that you have suction, that you have as
Yep.
much protection as possible.
Totally. Do you feel like personal care products are a big source of heavy metals too?
Yeah.
Or maybe let's talk about personal care products. Do those make your list, or are those, or does that kind of fall under the industrial chemical?
That's a great question, because personal care products are equally dangerous for both the industrial chemical side of things, also the microplastics and the heavy metals. There's a pretty famous study where they took a cross section of lipsticks across many, many brands just a couple years ago, and over 80% of them had high levels of lead contamination. We do not have enough insight into the supply chain. That's why it really matters what you're using. So when you think about your personal care, go ahead and throw it all out and burn it. No, I'm just kidding.
You're gonna have to tell me what lipstick you're wearing, because you have a great, and it's a darker shade, because I've always been told darker shades many times have heavier or higher levels of heavy metals.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have to tell me what brand, if you're comfortable.
Yeah, of course. So there are brands out there that are saying that they are clean, and what they mean is that they are avoiding certain chemicals and toxins that have become more visible to the consumer as being disruptive to their health. But that doesn't mean that they are tracking the supply chain for things like trace amounts of heavy metals. And so you need to choose a brand that is willing to do that. And even some of the, as a starter set of rules, anything that you put on your skin, you need to consider it food and ask, would I be willing to eat this? Because that's essentially what you're doing.
Yeah.
The skin is a highly efficient absorptive organ, right?
Yeah.
And we do not want to cause things like lymph congestion and all sorts of fun stuff by putting unnecessary things on our skin. So when it comes to things like lotion, it's really easy. Use organic coconut oil and organic shea butter. Flavor it with your favorite essential oil so that it has the perfect scent for you, but that it really is food, like you could eat it.
Mm-hmm.
That's an easy one.
And I'll comment on the coconut oil too. Most coconut oil these days is stored in glass, but don't be getting those that are stored in plastic and then heating them. Don't heat it up in the microwave. Like some of that, my listeners know, but if you're new to this podcast, make sure if you're getting, and I don't even know if shea butter comes in glass bottles, but I know the coconut oil, it does. Yeah. So I would recommend, I haven't used a lot of shea butter. Maybe I should, but at least the coconut oil I use, definitely, I always get a glass jar.
Yeah. So that's an easy one. I also like things like Herbalics or Morocco method for hair products, because they are so persistent and weeding out anything that could be toxic. Like you think about how women concentrate a lot of personal care products at their head, like right at their brain, right where it's the most difficult to drain. If any of your digestion or your lymph has been compromised, your toxic exposure to your brain is going to be severely compromised in your ability to drain, especially if you're not sleeping deeply and you don't have enough melatonin, or you're in the presence of EMFs. And most of us are all of the above. So you have this buildup that's really gross. And so I'm happy to link to Not for the faint of
Yeah.
heart, but there is a detox shampoo that will pull it out through the scalp. You do not look good while you're using it. I'm not going to pretend that you do. But you will smell things that you used to use years ago coming out of
Come
your
out.
scalp.
Oh, gross.
Trippy. Yeah.
What were the brands you mentioned? The good brands, Herbalics, and then what did you say? Moroccan.
Morocco method.
Oh, haven't heard
They
of that.
have
Morocco method. Okay.
several different products, based on your type of hair.
Yeah, cool.
And they do a really great job. For makeup, I use Beauty Counter or Crunchy.
Yep.
I
Yep.
use very little of it. Even products like, Ilia and Well, these do not track heavy metals whatsoever. And so they essentially amount to like, some very well-intentioned greenwashing, because they're not willing to actually look at if there's heavy metals in their products. That's not okay.
Mhm.
It's not good enough. So
I'm getting frustrated here, but let's keep going.
well, this is where it starts. So, the changes that we've made so far are all due to consumer demand, right? So it starts with things like listening to this podcast episode and deciding that you are worth it, that your family is worth it, and you're going to chip away at this problem. You're going to explore these brands. I like the fact that Beauty Counter has, a really lax return policy. If you don't like something, just return it. Like there's
Yeah,
no reason not
yeah,
to try it.
I totally agree. Yes.
And just use less. Like I changed my haircut, so I don't have to use hairspray anymore. What do you really have to use all this stuff? They're really good at getting us to think that we do.
Yes. Do you know statistics on, I used to know, and I kind of forgot them, like how many personal care products the average woman uses on a daily basis?
The different studies contradict themselves, but it's about 38 products.
It's a lot.
With toxic materials in them that women use. Yeah. And men, it's as low as 12, depending on the study.
Still a lot. Okay. So personal care
Your brain
products.
is real.
Yeah. So let's move on to another root cause. So give us another toxin that we haven't dived into yet.
Well, I think it's worth talking about mold because
let's do it.
The US is finally catching on to this a little bit in the functional medicine community, which is so wonderful, but we're still not good at recognizing the signs of it and understanding just how good mold is at representing in different ways. Like you could have brain fog, you could have depression, you could have sensitivity to light and sound, you could have serious digestive issues, and you could have skin sensitivities, you could have histamine issues. Like mold is quite the it's really good at hiding and presenting differently.
They used to say, I was always taught that Lyme is the great mimicker, but I almost feel like mold is more of a mimicker than Lyme, because although both they can go hand in hand anyways, but I feel like
no, that's so important to mention, because many people are still treating Lyme in isolation or mold in isolation, and they often create the perfect conditions for each other to thrive, right? And we're not talking about your grandma's mold. I don't know about you, but my grandmother lived through the Depression. And so when she saw mold on her food, she cut off that little bit and she kept right on eating, and she would not allow any other response.
Yep.
And that's not the mold that we're talking about, because mold today is very different. There are over 500 species of mold that are categorized so far, and each one has its own fun special quirks in ways that it disrupts the body and the types of mycotoxins, which is poison that it dumps into the body. But mold can, across those species, can become up to 600 times more toxic in the presence of EMFs. And what are EMFs? They are different electrical pollution stimuluses that from like your router, your cell phone, the wiring in your wall. Mold uses the electrical frequencies that our routers use, for example, to communicate within the colony. And they think that they're under attack when it's like their signal's getting jammed. So they start dumping far more poison than they ever used to before. Think about how long we've had routers in our homes. Not that long. 15 years, maybe?
Yeah, I don't even know.
Max? Yeah. Some of us, it's much less than that. So while you may have lived in a water damaged building before, because over half the buildings in the US have been water damaged, and it's less than 24 hours for mold to start colonizing in a water damaged building. Do the math. This is a rapidly developing problem that's just exploded, just a little over a decade. That's why it's coming to the forefront of our consciousness in functional medicine.
Yeah, scary. I first learned about mold toxicity, I think through, I really got to think back, but I think it was through a patient who had breast implant illness who came to
Mm,
me. She had just severe brain fog, and I mean, from a functional medicine standpoint, I feel like I did everything. I optimized her hormones. We somewhat detoxed the body, clearly not of mold, but I mean, we removed food sensitivities. I felt like I really worked her through kind of my protocol, and um, she just wasn't getting better. And she thought she may have breast implant illness. And I, at that point, said, okay, I'm going to look into this. Of course, in Iowa, I don't even know at that time if there were any surgeons. I think she went out of state for the explant, but it was like the next day she felt better. And that was probably for a variety of reasons. But long story short, I've talked about this on a few other episodes. I ran what I knew at that point were some serum markers, some C3A, C4A, TGF-beta1, some markers that I was just starting to learn to explore biotoxin illnesses with. And sure enough, her labs were abnormal. And so I thought, okay, she's onto something. She obviously made the right decision having those implants removed.
mm.
But that kind of then led me to think, okay, what was in the implants? Well, what heavy metals or toxins or chemicals or mold, or like what was in those implants? And then I started learning about mold, and we've had several floods here. And it was like, once I started looking for it, I saw it everywhere, opened the flood, literally the floodgates. And patients started flocking in because so many of them had mold. And I almost felt like an idiot that I hadn't known about this before. But like you said, I'm grateful that functional medicine is now finally looking at some of these things. They're now finally recognizing mold and teaching practitioners how to find it, what to look for. I think that's where my journey began with mold, but I now use urine mycotoxin testing as well. We use all types of testing for our patients, but I think it's most important for them to assess their environment like you did, to see if their home or their car is their source of exposure or their work or whatnot.
It absolutely is. And it's also important to understand that you have to look backwards in your history, because mold doesn't just colonize in the building that you're in, it colonizes in you, whether you inhale it, and so it can be in your sinuses, your lungs, it can be in your digestive tract, and it wants to take over, so it's really good at elbowing out other microbes so that it can really survive. And it also competes against other strains of mold in your body. So you may have been exposed in your workplace. We had an amazing client. She was such a delight. She had her gallbladder removed, and she had really been struggling with her health, before that and ever since. And she had been removed like over 15 years ago by the time she met us. She had been exposed to mold 20 years ago in her workplace. She worked in the doctor's office. And so we took her through a deep mold detox, because the more she was in the presence of EMFs, it was like kicking it up a notch, kicking it up a notch, kicking it up a notch, and she was getting more and more anxious and having more and more difficult digestive symptoms. And we took her through, a deep mold detox, and she completely reclaimed who she is. All the mental fatigue went away, all the anxiety, all the digestive issues. It's just amazing. Another woman had a really hardy constitution, but she said, oh, I just have terrible allergies. I can't deal with it, and I can't kick this candida, and I don't know why. Like, really? Have you ever tested your home? Have you ever done a urine mycotoxin test? No, I don't have any symptoms of mold. I have allergies and I have candida. I'm like, well, sweetie, let's talk, because these things are related, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like candida often follows along behind mold as the opportunist, because mold creates the perfect conditions for it. And they're actually quite closely related,
Can you talk a bit about biofilms here also?
Yeah. So it's important when you're talking about biofilms to understand that most of us, when we're talking about biofilms in the functional medicine community, we're talking about the bad ones. You have healthy, good, appropriate biofilms in every organ, or you should, that are appropriate to that organ. What we're talking about are parasitic biofilms, that they are actually essentially colonizing parasites that take the form of a thick sludge, and you cannot kill them with antibiotics. You would kill yourself with the appropriate antibiotic dose to kill them 5,000 times over before you kill the biofilm. So you have to pull it out and use other methods than antibiotics to get rid of this stuff. And it's very much, opportunistic, just like, all parasites. It will thrive where there is where there's stagnation, so low flow in the body, and high amounts of toxins. Those two things go together, right? A moving stream runs clean, right? When you think about a stream, ducks are happy when the water is clear, they're all over the place. But in the part of the stream where there's a bunch of, fast food wrappers. You start to see the water slow down. You start to see algae start to bloom. That's the biofilm. Ducks don't want to go in that part. They don't want anywhere near it, right?
Mhm.
Like your good bugs and your immune system and all that stuff. They cannot thrive in that environment, but parasites and biofilms can. So they will house toxins for you because they thrive in an anaerobic, high stagnation environment. And it makes it that much more difficult to get rid of them. And they really do disrupt the body's systems.
So I want to kind of try to put that in layman's terms. So this sludge, you're saying, can house organisms like mold toxins, Lyme, right? So that's why just take an antibiotic, you think, oh, I'll just take an antibiotic to treat the Lyme, or I'll take a binder to bind the mold, whatnot, is not all that is needed. We have to be able to penetrate the biofilm, or as you're kind of saying, pull the organisms out so that we can then treat them. And I think
Absolutely.
that's what makes a really good practitioner, is when they can figure out how to treat the biofilm, because so many patients don't get better when we're not addressing the biofilm.
Exactly. It's why it's so useful to work with a practitioner who actually understands what a real deep detox is, because you need mitochondrial support, nutrient support, because if you have chronic illness symptoms, you're not absorbing your food effectively. Sorry. And your food's been empty for decades because of commercial farming practices. So you have some catch-up work to do, right? And then you absolutely need not just, binders to mop up toxins, but you need a way to safely pull them out of storage and to remove your body and your the parasites, strategies for storing them, which includes but are not limited to biofilm. So it's about gently doing this all in tandem at a pace that your body can tolerate, right?
I love that, yes, because if you detox too quickly, many patients feel sicker and they just fall off the protocol because they are feeling worse. So why would they continue?
Right.
When clearly they need to detox. That's if they're having these symptoms, so clearly they do need to detox.
Yeah, I mean, I've been there. I listened to Summit talks back in the day, and I was like, okay, I got it. I'm going to take some cilantro, and then my mercury is going to be gone. I'm like, no.
It's not quite that easy. Do eat your cilantro, but yeah, it's not quite that easy.
You need elements to balance it. You need to think about your detox protocol like a house. Every wall has a different function. You need the support beams in place, a great foundation before you put the pressure of a roof on top.
Yep, that's great. So what is your best recommendation for patients to test their environment for mold? Like, do you use ERMI testing, or what do you recommend?
Yeah, ERMI testing is fine. So is immunolytics. We like to, wherever possible, use local experts, because nothing beats eyes in the house itself.
Sure. But if there aren't any local experts, like if you live in Iowa.
Right, exactly. Then immunolytics or ERMI is the way to go. Yeah.
What is the immunolytics? I think some of my patients have done those actually and sent them into me. That sounds familiar.
It's a concept to ERMI where you leave the plates out.
Okay.
Immunolytics, you can get some information without having to send in to pay for the analysis. So there's a couple of layers and ways to do it, which is nice. And you also have to remember to do things like test your car, right? Test your workplace. It's not just about the home.
Oh, yeah.
Test the attic, test the basement, because if it's affecting your HVAC system, it doesn't have to be in sight. And mold loves drywall. Like, I cannot emphasize it enough. It can be behind the paint.
It's food for the mold. Yeah.
In the drywall. Yeah.
That cellulose will feed the mold. Yeah.
Yes. So you do not have to see it for it to be there. Trust me. And also, you got to remember that, people are really proud of their reverse osmosis filters, right? But those can mold very easily. So we had a woman with really bad colitis come to us. When she started working with us, she could not take a sip of water without excreting blood and mucus. It was so bad. And she had to plan her whole workday around this. It was really intense for her. So we healed her whole digestive tract, and yet she was still struggling with weight and heart palpitations and fatigue. And we kept telling her, we told her the first, moment we saw her, you've got mold. Guaranteed, let's run some panels on you. Of course it was there. Even the lab called and was like, this is really high citrulline. Do you have a good plan for this? Like, this is scary. It's bad when the lab is calling you. So a year into working with us, she still hadn't removed her, or still hadn't dealt with her water. She had the mold people out. They said, no, 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 there's no mold in this house. She's like, you're wrong. It's, this is an old exposure. It's not in my home right now. Like, you're taking way too long to recover. It's still in the house. You still haven't dealt with your water. It's got to be the water. And she finally tested it. And yes, it was a reverse osmosis filter. And she was
Wow.
re-exposing herself and her children.
Wow. Yeah,
And
that makes me think about mine. I guess I gotta check that filter.
yeah,
out.
within a week of going to distilled water instead, her heart palpitations were gone and her fatigue was cut in half.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's what makes our job so hard. I mean, and that's why so many patients have these chronic illnesses, because who would have thought of that?
Yeah.
1 in a 10,000 practitioners. I mean, seriously, like, who would have thought of that? I mean, so that's great.
A lot of it is clinical experience, right? And
Totally.
stories kept from podcasts like this. Like, it's so
Yep.
worth it.
Those little pearls. Those
Listen in
little
on
things.
someone else's experience.
Exactly.
Right?
Gleaning from that.
We should just do that. We should just do detox stories. Like,
Yeah.
come
That's
on
a
my
good-
podcast and we'll do detox stories.
That is a great idea. That's a great idea. I want to go back to EMFs here, and I want to spend some time with EMFs, because I know that this has become a passion of mine, and I know that you could do a whole episode, which you probably have on your podcast, on EMFs.
Yeah.
So tell us why they're bad. Tell us why they've increased, and then let's spend some time on the good stuff as far as what we can do to reduce our exposure.
Yeah, absolutely. So most people, when they think of EMS, they think about, your cell phone is bad and 5G is scary. And, both of those things, you're not wrong, but that's a very, very small part of the picture.
Mhm.
So let's just break this down for a second. And no, I'm not going to tell you to throw away your cell phone, don't worry. So when you think about EMS, there's actually several kinds. There's RF, which is radiation.
Mhm.
And that's from Wi-Fi routers, cell phone towers, microwaves, Bluetooth, cell phones, smart devices. Smart, it turns out, is not so smart for the body.
No.
Yeah, smart for corporations, stupid for us.
Yeah, right.
And it's pretty telling when, like Microsoft on their campuses doesn't have Wi-Fi. They're all wired in fiber optic.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
pretty telling.
Listeners, did you know that? Yes, did you know that?
And the former CEO of Microsoft Canada actually resigned several years ago over this issue and their refusal to deal with it. And instead went into building a nonprofit, the Environmental Health Trust, where he actually educates schools to pull Wi-Fi out of the
Good
classroom.
for him. That's great.
Yeah, it's a very interesting story. You should check him out. So that's RF. And then you also have, just for simplicity's sake, because people can get overwhelmed by this quickly, I'll just go through them. Dirty electricity, that's anything over 60 cycles per second. That's extra noise pollution on your circuits, basically. And that comes from your appliances, from nearby cell phone towers, from your own smart devices. It's basically irritating, fuzzy background noise that shouldn't be there. And it causes a lot of distress. That in itself, like Michael, my partner, had serious anxiety for years. Like, he would walk into his office at work and just like be overcome by anxiety, could not deal with it. Come to find out, dirty electricity was the first type EMF that he discovered and measured for us. He was sitting in a reading of 1900 right at his desk, and it should be 50 or below to avoid biological effects. So we put in a very small, unobtrusive filter right on the outlet behind his desk, and it dropped it down to 80, still a little high, but significantly different, right? That thing was like $30. And his anxiety totally went away. So we got excited. We ran around our whole office building. We didn't tell any of our employees what we were doing. And we put filters wherever the readings were too high. Well, their sick days went down. Their interdepartmental fighting went down. Confusion on projects went down. It's like, oh, this is.
Oh, we're onto something here. So what Sinclair is saying is, so this can be tested for. So so we have a meter that you can, and I'm sure you sell these maybe as well, you can plug into, I don't say meter, a reader, whatnot, a device that you can plug into outlets to test if there's dirty electricity coming out of that outlet, right? So, because I know for the listeners, they may be thinking, what exactly is she talking about? So then you can put I guess you would call it a filter in that outlet, or you can put something on your actual, would you call it your circuit breaker? to clean up the dirty electricity, like through the whole home.
Exactly. So it can be put on the circuit panel itself or throughout the home or office building at each outlet where the hotspots are. So the meter that's the industry standard is called the Stetzer meter. It's very economically, easy to pick up. I think it's like $100. We sell them. It's no big deal. And you can take these measurements and then apply these small filters by hotspot throughout your home or office building, or you can make a modification to the panel itself and deal with the whole building.
So that's for dirty electricity. So that's different, right, than this radiation from the cell phone, right?
And
so there are layers of these.
Yes. So let's back up, because with RF, your job is to reduce your exposure as much as possible, especially when you're sleeping, right? Because your body is much more sensitized to RF while it's asleep. It's trying to build these complex detox enzyme chains that can take up to 6 hours to build, to flush toxins out of your body. It's trying to regenerate, and EMFs disrupt all of those processes. So you want to think about shielding yourself, where if you can't turn something off, like, do you really need your wireless printer on all day long? Like, how often do you use that thing? Just unplug it, and it's important to understand, like, a meter for RF is really fun to use because it gets the whole family on board, because it creates a way for you to see it, right? Because this stuff is invisible, and that's partially why EMFs have been called the smoking of our time.
I haven't heard that.
Oh,
yeah, that makes sense.
Because they are equal, if not greater, as the carcinogenic exposure, and it's so widespread.
So why do people not? I have some family members who just don't. I mean, my dad has a business on EMF mitigation, so he believes in this. But why do some people not believe it? Is it because these toxins are invisible, and without having a meter to kind of read the degree of exposure? Why do you think so many people don't necessarily believe in the danger of EMFs? Are there studies to support this?
Oh my God, there's over 14,000 studies. This is not an edgy, like, is it true or isn't it? Like, no, this is well-established scientific fact. Go on PubMed, type in EMF. You will see well over 14,000 studies. That's what it was a couple of years ago. I think it's actually closer to 20,000 studies now. It's just that there is so much money in suppressing this information. And every once in a while, if you follow people like Stephanie, we might share, or retweet something like, hey, turns out, look at this lawsuit revealed that telecom companies knew that, RFs were disruptive to your health, and they actually had a way to reduce your exposure to them with their technology, and they didn't. And then look at this payout that happened, but it's not getting put on the news because who advertises on TV?
Right.
These companies. And big tech is now over 5 times as powerful as big pharma when you look at the lobbying dollars. So there's a very real payoff to being ignorant. And I think that the American consumer is still catching up, with our explosion of chronic health issues recently. There's a big awakening happening. There has been over the last several years, right? But we're still combating this idea that we were raised with, which is like, if we live in the US or a developed country, we are safe because someone else is doing this thinking for us, right? When the truth is, we're all in a grand experiment right now, and we're just starting to see the side effects of those experiments. And you and me, the everyday folks, are the first ones to feel it. So the canaries in the coal mine are the ones that are speaking up. And it's whether or not we listen, or do we wait until something happens to somebody in our family. It's really your choice, right? And I was the dumbass, okay? I really did not want to hear about any of this. So I have all kinds of compassion for the people in the family that don't want to listen, because when it's
easier. Ignorance is bliss until you get cancer. Yeah.
And also, people don't realize how fatigued they are right now, because everybody else around them is also stressed and fatigued and displaying a slow creep of chronic health issues. So if they don't have anything to compare, or what they are comparing it to is actually misleading them. So when you talk about taking their conveniences away, or asking them to look into this and think for themselves, it feels like way too big a burden. It feels disproportionately difficult than it would if you were healthy.
Yeah, I think you nailed that on the head. That was good. So how do you feel about things like safe sleeve cases? I've always advocated for these, but I understand that only the front is really blocking any radiation. So what are your tips for your patients and listeners on what they can do for reducing dangers from cell phones?
That's a great question. So the first thing is get to know your settings, because you do not need your cellular data, your Wi-Fi, and your Bluetooth on all at the same time. You just don't. And that's 3 ways for your phone to broadcast distress at your body. Because it's not just about when are you using your cell phone. Your cell phone company is using your cell phone for you, and you are broadcasting a signal, not just receiving one. So if we all turned off our wireless devices, or we turned off the ability for the companies to do this, they wouldn't be able to prop up their networks by bouncing their signals across our devices, and their networks would crash. So you have to understand that it's always creating distress, whether or not you're using it. So just be deliberate. If you don't need it on, turn it off, or at least turn off the Bluetooth and the Wi-Fi and keep the cellular data on. You only need one signal at a time to bring something in.
Yep.
And distance is your friend when it comes to radiation, to RF, so radiation distress, we'll call it, just to put it in real terms, because that's what it is. The biological effects have an exponential drop off the further away they get from your body. So it really does matter and make a difference. If you put it on speakerphone and hold it at arm's length, or put it on the table or on your desk, the person can still hear you. Please don't put it up to your face ever again, not next to your brain, because you have no skull bone protecting you between your ear and your brain. It's one of the most vulnerable places. So why would we put Bluetooth there, Bluetooth headphones? Please don't do that. Especially the health practitioners listening, you don't look smart anymore. You do not look cool. Stop doing it. Your patients are getting wise to you. You look dumb.
Yes, I have patients who come to their appointments wearing their Bluetooth,
Aww.
headphones, and that they're trying to work, or they're, and no, don't do that. Don't do that.
Yes, exactly.
So yes, so distance, you're saying, and then do you like these cases? Are you a fan of?
I like safe sleeve, and I'll tell you why, because for me, the meters always tell the story.
Yes.
Many of these cases are placebo effects at best. Like if you're spending $20 or $100 on like a hologram something, if you can't measure the change on a meter, it was a waste of money. I'm sorry, and I am super woo-woo. I really am. I'm a giant hippie, but I don't put my beautiful crystals on top of my stack of bills and expect them to take care of my bank account. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Like totally.
And the same goes for EMFs for me, that there are, the laws of physics do not bend for a sticker. So Safe Shield is a great option, especially because it's, when you think about, and I have mine right here too, when you think about shielding yourself from radiation, you want to create a shadow between yourself and the source of radiation. So you want to physically block it and shield it. So like, for example, with smart meters, we had somebody a client who was living in a townhome, and they were like, their neighbor's smart meter, which broadcasts a really strong RF signal, was just a few feet away from their bed. And they had no way to, and the neighbor didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to deal with it, wouldn't put a cover on it or anything. So we actually
painted the wall, or what did you?
No, because that has its own issues. We should totally do an episode just about this and nerd out. We created an RF shield that, with just really cheap materials from Home Depot behind a painting, and hung the painting in a certain spot.
Yeah.
And because it was so close to the meter itself, it was able to completely block the signal. So super interesting. There's always a way, but you want to think in terms of creating a shadow.
A shadow. I love that.
Yes. Yeah.
So what's the problem with the paint? Or is it just that maybe where you're going with this is that people who are inexperienced could create more of a danger for themselves if they create their own Faraday cage and then get stuck in it while they're using their cell phone? Like,
exactly.
Do you believe EMF blocking paint can be used appropriately if the user is aware and measuring and knows like which wall to paint, whatnot?
I have yet to see a scenario where the shielding paint is an appropriate investment. I'll put it that way. It's not that it doesn't reflect the signal. It does.
Does, yeah.
That's exactly what it does. So what home do you know where you will have indefinite full buy-in from every person who comes into the home to not bring smart devices in and create this endless bounce?
I would say it for a single person. If you're the only person living in your home and you're putting
who
your phone
never
in airplane mode,
entertains.
who doesn't have company, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And also you have to think about every window has to be shielded as well. I can't tell you the number of times people brought us in, oh, we're really sick, because we do these EMF mitigations for people. Someone in our home is really sick, but we did the EMF shielding. We have the paint everywhere. It's like, okay, what's going on with the windows? Because they're not shielded. And so you are letting in all the neighbors' frequencies, and then they're bouncing off of your walls at you.
Yep. This is the same reason why airplanes can be so dangerous, right? So they're basically this big metal bullet, and there's how many people in a small space. There's distance is not on your side when you're in an airplane, right? So those rays are bouncing off all the walls of the plane, and you're just getting slammed. I feel like that's partly why patients get so tired when they travel too. I don't know what
it is. Yeah. And there's supplements that you can take so that you're more resilient, because
like antioxidants. That's what I tell patients.
Yeah, because 95% of the distress that EMFs cause in the moment to your cells is oxidative stress. When you look at how peroxynitrate works, right? So, but that's a huge rabbit hole. But you can take something like molecular hydrogen tabs before and after the flight. You can take rosemary, which is neuroprotective against EMF damage. You can, add it to your food. That's a very small dose, but you can take a rosemary tincture, or even, dried rosemary in a capsule.
Rosemary, great for your thyroid too.
Right? Yeah. But the bottom line for RF is shield, especially while you're asleep. That's why like the canopies, things like that are such a great solution.
Yep. I know you're the expert here, but I'm going to mention a few things on that as far as shielding at night. So I do think it's important that you assess your home with a meter, because you want to know, like, as we discovered that for years, my husband's head was, as we sleep, the master bedroom was right up against our cable box, which was on the latter side of that wall. And he had never been a great sleeper, and he's still not an amazing sleeper, but he sleeps a heck of a lot better. Having turned off the Wi-Fi at night, or we don't even have a cable box anymore. Now we don't even watch TVs. It's gone now, but we used to every single night, and it would drive him nuts, but he knew it was helpful. I would say, unplug it. Did you unplug? Did you unplug the cable box? Because I didn't want that penetrating into his head, which I could literally assess with a meter. And until you spend the time to go around your house and look for dirty electricity, and look for where things like your cable box or your router or whatever are causing problems, you just don't know where those problems lie. Same is true with even infants. So you want to look and see, where are you positioning that crib, right? Or is there dirty electricity around that crib? Listeners may think I'm crazy, but we never had a baby monitor. I mean, generations ago, there were no baby monitors. You can survive without a baby monitor. You don't need wireless baby monitor, right? Broadcasting into your baby's head. So I did get one at my shower, and I tested it, and it was the highest of any of the devices in the home, including the cable box. And I said, I can't use this. I can't. Are you kidding me? Set this right by my son? No way, Jose. So I think baby monitors are a huge source of radiation exposure in the home as well.
Really, a lot of nursery-related tech now, which is totally unnecessary. So the nursery could actually be the highest exposure to the most vulnerable being in the entire home. Yeah.
Scary.
Part of our rapid EMF reset process is to help people understand that we're actually coming out with an infant safety, EMF safety certification this year for birth workers. So
smart.
Yeah.
So smart.
Yeah.
Well, we spent a lot of time on EMFs here, but I know which I have thoroughly enjoyed. But I do want to talk about plastics, because I feel like I think you believe that's another root cause of not just digestive diseases, but chronic illness. So are plastics bad? Where are we finding them? Take the mic on plastics.
Well, spoiler alert, they're everywhere. Have I mentioned I have a lot of fun at parties? Back when we had parties before 2020. Yeah. So it's true. Plastics and we got to understand what we're talking about with plastics. We're saying petroleum-based substances, polymers that are not natural. And most of the time, we're talking about the off-gassing from plastics or the microplastics as plastics break down. For example, in your washing machine, you know, from your super fancy synthetic clothing and your high performance, you know, athletic, you know, high tech, you know, windbreaker or whatever it is that wicks moisture away from you, that's, you know, has all that great, all those great properties that you paid extra for. That's breaking down and it's going into the municipal water stream. And we are not designed to filter that out. And neither are most of the filters that are on the market today. So we are drinking plastics as much as we are eating or breathing them in. So it's really important to understand. And that water is getting, is irrigating your food, your organic crops.
Yep.
And it is also, and of course there are plastics in our personal care products, which we've already covered today. So I won't spend a lot of time on it, but you will absorb those, you know, all the plastics and Jergens, for example, it's going to go right through your skin and into your interstitium and then your lymph and then, you know, junk up your liver.
Can greatly impact your hormones as well.
Yeah.
I have not a funny story, a sad story yesterday. So I'm going to just kind of, I guess, bash this brand. We bought a GE Profile Series dishwasher. I mean, it was over $1,000. It was like we were like, we're going to splurge and get this really nice dishwasher, right, with the top rack that we had never had before for baby stuff and whatnot. Then I think we bought a lemon, so I don't think it's GE. I think we literally bought a lemon. But to make a long story short, the plastic pieces that hold the bottom rack in commonly fall off, and then they hit the metal rack on the bottom and melt. And so leaching plastic fumes, is that what you would call them? I don't know, into the house. And so the dishwasher was under warranty. And so I see the look on her face is like, no, this is bad. While the machine was under warranty, we had someone come out to try to fix it. It was never thoroughly fixed. And literally yesterday, my in-laws were over and they were in the dishwasher and this happened. And it almost, I feel like I almost have post-traumatic stress from this happening, because we know there are toxins everywhere, but I feel like I really try to make wise choices and with keeping distance on my side with EMFs and not exposing myself to plastics. And then here I have this lemon of a dishwasher that's leaching these toxic fumes into my home. And I literally mid-afternoon was like, I have to go home. I told the staff, I'm like, I'm leaving. I didn't have patience yesterday afternoon. I was just working, but I had to go home and get my son out of the house while we aired it out. It's snowing here. It's freezing. I told my in-laws, go home. We're getting out of here. I took the dog and my son. We have multiple air doctors running in the house and it did air out. But that's just one example, you know, of how we're exposed to these toxic fumes. And I think maybe 80% of white people would just say, oh, no big deal. It's a little smell. It's probably not hazardous to your health. And they may,
you got a headache, pop some Advil. Yeah.
Yeah, not a big deal. And the first time this happened, I had a headache almost immediately. And of course it happened at we ran the dishwasher at 10:30 at night. So at 11 o'clock at night, we started smelling these fumes. And I told Eric, this is not good. We can't sleep in this house tonight. I got to go to work in the morning. So I know I'm more aware of this issue, but I wanted to give that story to listeners just for them to be aware of these sort of things, because these plastics, like you're saying, so I can inhale those plastics and then they can get stored in my body and lead to chronic disease. So our house is aired out and we're getting rid of the dishwasher. That was the final straw. We're getting a new dishwasher. Hopefully we can get one in the next few months. Hopefully there aren't supply chain issues there, but I'm done. I've had it. They've never fixed it. And some of those decisions, although they might be big financial decisions, right? Get another dishwasher, it's worth it for your family. Like you said, you pay now or you pay later. So we are getting a new dishwasher.
Well, and it's so, the story is so important because you really have to think about your sources of exposure and almost treat it like a game, guys who are listening, so that you don't wear yourself out, because we don't want you going through life afraid. We want you feeling vibrant and alive and vital and happy and carefree, because you know you've taken the time to make the best decisions for your family and you're always in a state of learning and curiosity and you're not getting overwhelmed. Like, you could take that story from Dr. Stephanie and get totally overwhelmed, or you could decide, you know what, I'm going to get curious now. And if that can happen from her dishwasher, think about what putting plastics, plastic Tupperware and storage would do in the dishwasher as well. Because plastics they are endocrine disruptors, right? Because a lot of them have fun xenoestrogen properties, which means they mimic estrogen and they throw off your body's ability to maintain its own appropriate hormone levels, right? So we really need to think through how they affect the body, because they also get stored. Like, we ingest more than enough plastic to form a credit card every week as Americans.
Wow.
And most of that is not getting excreted. If it is, it's going through the bowels usually, thankfully, but it's often getting stored. And like, for example, we talked about biofilm earlier. It can get lodged in biofilm in the gut lining. And you're like, why can't I absorb my food? And I'm spending hundreds of dollars a month on supplements. Why can't I fix this? In the digestive tract, which is one of the fastest healing systems in the body, why can't it just heal itself? It's because these things are disrupting your body's self-healing mechanisms. So that's why we care, right? In the first place.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You're such a wealth of knowledge, and I could talk to you for another hour, but I know you got to go. So in conclusion of this episode, tell us a few things. So first, tell us where listeners can find you, what your business is, where you're located. And then, I guess start there.
Okay, sure. So you can find us at detoxrejuvenation.com. We see clients all over the world. And we actually have a summit coming up that I want to make sure we talk about, because you're a guest on it.
Yes.
So fun. It's called It Starts in the Gut. Surprise, surprise. Discover your root causes, get rapid results. And it's a deep dive into everything we're talking about today. How to assess your life for what may have been causing maybe the original cause of your health disruption, and how to get your life back, right?
Love it, love it, love it.
Yeah.
Where else can listeners find you? I know.
Oh yeah, so come listen to our podcast, Your Health Reset, on all podcast, distribution channels. And you can find us on Instagram, Detox Rejuvenation. Same thing with Facebook. I also run a really amazing meditation platform with my partner, Dr. Tom Moorcroft, called Meditation RX, where we use meditation to support your health protocols for people working on chronic illness. So
love it, love it. I saw last night you posted something on your Facebook page about the insect apocalypse, which is probably, I didn't read it all, but something about like, why have insects declined 75%? It's probably from toxins, and I know we don't have time to get into that, but go check out her Facebook page for some fun posts like that. And then lastly, I didn't want to ask you too many questions at once. I wanted to start it with those last two, but tell us about your free gift. So you have a detox quiz also.
Yeah, we do. And it's a really great way for you to check for yourself, hey, what stage am I in? What would detox do for me if I did a real detox? Am I in the proactive stage? What can this do for me? So how high do you score with your symptoms, and how do you compare to other people? It's pretty eye-opening.
Love it, love it. I will post a link to that in the show notes. Last but not least, top longevity tip.
Top longevity tip, obviously, is detox.
Could have seen that one coming.
No, but seriously, to consider where and to understand that you are a part of your environment, you are not separate from it, and to consider the source for everything that you bring into your life and into your family's lives and into your bodies. Because the number one thing that we can do, yes, there are some toxins you can't avoid, but we're still our number one source of exposure. So you get to choose the quality of your life. Our ill health span at the end of our lives has more than doubled. It used to be 10 years long that we would feel not so good at the end of our lives. And just in the last 10 years, that has doubled to 20 years of ill health at the end of our lives. That is not okay. We're going the wrong direction. So you can switch to organic tea. You can switch to organic loose leaf tea, so it's not in a plastic tea bag. You can take a fresh look at your water filtration system and choose something within your budget. You can choose to go organic. You can make sure you never microwave food in a plastic container again. These are really small things that you can do to add up to your longevity and protect your family. And they're so worth it. You got this, guys. You can do this.
Love it, love it, love it. I love this episode. Well, thank you so much, Sinclair, for coming on the show today and hopefully enlightening our audience on several places they're exposed to toxins while still instilling and empowering hope that they can do something about this toxic world. So thanks for coming on the show today.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Stephanie. You were a great interviewer.